can be doing in terms not just of entry rules, but exit rules. Something similar was shared with an important piece by Mark Carney on the country platforms about the expectations and prerequisites of private sector to do what is expected, especially in the context of the announcements of the GFANs and their commitments to fund the net zero initiatives in developing and emerging markets. A list of expectations, you can consider it as a perfect risk list, but actually if you are not getting that perfect list, at least we don't need to make the perfect enemy of the good, and we need to make sure that we have in place the kind of support required by the private sector to protect their property rights, to protect their business from any kind of major political disruption, including political risk. And then there is a very interesting issue that was raised in both papers. It's basically about preparing project pipelines. Yes, we can talk about gaps forever, but the funds and money is there in the system, not necessarily at the country level, especially if you are in a typical developing economy, but globally, there are supplies of funds that need really to be channeled towards funding the pipeline of projects. In a previous session, and sorry for those who are in the room who heard me saying that before, that we had 5 regional roundtables with the regional economic commissions of the UN with support by BCG, by the GFANs, and by the regional economic commissions of the UN system. And we managed to have a pipeline of projects submitted by more than 80 countries. More than 400 projects were in a long list. They were shortlisted. Our colleague Sagrika just shared that we have 120 projects covering different aspects of work. 62%, I think, were in mitigation, and the rest either dual purpose or in adaptation. I'm saying that because if you are looking for pipeline project, there is a compendium, there is a report called From Assets to Flows, which could be the answer to the question that you just raised about from commitments to delivery. But here we can really push the agenda further by getting these pipeline of projects, get the supply to meet the demand. And then you will be discovering that's not just having the potential demand meeting the potential supply. There is a connector. The connector here that for each country, you need a kind of a coordinator, a maestro, a ministry with mandate, supported with good capacities for multilateral development banks in order to do this kind of good matchmaking. Because you can always see the supply side here, the demand side, and we have them all, say, in the room. But what would make these kind of projects come to fruition and being pushed into action is basically this fundamental role. If you don't have it, if your country is not called Singapore or Korea or Vietnam, they have now capacities. Some countries would require such support for their institutional system. And actually, our country included here is working, and you may have seen the launching of the platform on the Nexus on food, water, and energy, which is basically about establishing the country platform with putting a priority for areas that are basically not just relevant to climate, they are all relevant to climate, but we have an additional segment to that, linking them to energy, food, and water, and the three are suffering either from some crisis of some sort or difficulty around the world, but Egypt came with a kind of very practical support, not complaining alone, that could help at the short term, but providing some sort of good solution by providing its own pipeline of projects and trying to solicit the technical support from the MDBs and getting serious discussions with members of GFANs and others. For Africa, I'm happy to say, and we just had the second board meeting attended by Ms. Mary Shapiro a couple of days ago, that we established a new chapter for Africa based on the image of the global effort of GFANs globally, but with African focus, trying to do two things. The pipeline of projects for Africa is being presented, But actually, in this very room yesterday, we launched a very important initiative that came out from the discussion that we had in Addis when we were preparing the pipeline, which is the first initiative for establishing a carbon credit market for African countries, capturing the value, working will be based on international standards with adequate regulators. And I'm very comfortable to say that the regulator of the financial services sector in Egypt is the same person who's leading the work in the carbon credit market in partnership with the private sector from agriculture and energy, and he is my co-chair or vice chair for GFANZ Africa. So I hope that when we got asked this question again, with all of these practical solutions being put in place, I think we'll be having serious transactions. Some of them were announced yesterday in the case of Egypt, but I'd like to see the momentum in the whole continent and beyond.